All right. Hello again to everybody. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever it is you're tuning in from. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's event. My name is Hala Alawi, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, I am so pleased to welcome you to a day of literary fiction. We're featuring new releases from our authors. Today, we'll be hearing from Stephen Barron, reading from Madame Curie's Piano Tuner, released March 14th, 2023. Marianna Boncek, reading from Diamond City, which was released April 24th, 2023. And Sharon Steeber, reading from But Do You Love Me with Locura, released April 25th, 2023. All three authors' books can be purchased both from online retailers and from select bookstores. And of course, you can order the books from Atmosphere's website at atmospherepress.com/books. And I'm dropping some links in the chat as well. At the end of today's event, we will have time for an audience Q&A. So during the readings, if you think of any questions for one or more of our authors, just go ahead and type it in the chat and I will make sure it gets asked. And then during the actual reading itself, please stay muted so we can keep extraneous sound at a minimum. Of course, you are always welcome to use the chat for any praise and comments. And one last note before we get started, we at Atmosphere Press appreciate your support today and always. If you have a manuscript of your own, we would love to read it, so feel free to submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com. Again, thank you so much for tuning in and supporting Stephen, Marianna, and Sharon this afternoon, morning, wherever you are. Let's start off with our first reader, who is Stephen Barron. Stephen is originally from Atlanta, Georgia, but spent many formative years in Southern California. He currently resides in Leawood, Kansas, with his wife, Renee, and their two kittens, Hazel and Henry. Madame Curie's Piano Tuner is his first published work. Contact him by email at sbarronhwy61@yahoo.com or visit his website, shbmcpt.com. In Stephen's novel, newly licensed piano tuner Raymond Dover visits the burg of Bucksnort with the intent to provide services for a veteran's retirement home. Shortly after arrival, Ray is stricken with a mysterious amnesia and subsequently obliges to spend time at a county bug house for observation and treatment. Therapeutic success leads to discharge, and Ray subsequently decides to stay on a while in the area. We'll follow Ray now as we welcome Stephen. Oh, Stephen, just make sure that you are unmuted as well.
Okay, there we go.
There you are.
All right. Hello, all. Madame Curie's Piano Tuner takes place in the fictional burg of Bucksnort. The author tags Bucksnort as a dream town of the most wearisome proportions, a sometimes metropolis with all the attendant anxieties of other city centers, subsisting to in tandem with a solid dose of tar black small town menace. I'll be reading from a section called Remote Viewing. In it, the protagonist, Raymond Dover, comments on a contingent of the local Bucksnort populace he recognizes as disconnects. Citizens who have, for one reason or another, come unhitched from themselves, so benumbed to thoughts, feelings, emotions, etc. A scant few of the unmourned attempt to deal with this unpleasantness by means of remote viewing. Remote viewing, the cathedral of learning. Enter one Mr. Hiram Poteet, not my real name, he confides, just my current one. Besides being both observer and chronicler of psychic phenomena, Hiram is also an inveterate practitioner of what's termed by miscellaneous intelligence agencies around town as remote viewing, RV. The ability to project oneself across time, either back through spent seasons or forward into the future, and then take up temporary residence in the targeted locale without being there physically is a feat all disconnects wish they could manage, though few can. Like Hiram, most remote viewers are also disconnects made so by means and methods recently detailed, so no need to rehash. As an addendum, however, it should be noted that the RV's induced rupture, ascribable to amp maltreatment by perpetrators, got the violence and deprivation knobs turned to the max, is markedly more aggressive, more invasive, and absolute than that suffered by their outnumbering counterparts. Ask any remote viewer, the break with self is experienced as an abrupt across the board unhitching from everything once considered near and dear, and gone to any semblance of a once lovely leather-bound boyhood, until all that remains is a smoking, charred black mass, still with an ass load of debt that'll press like narrow doors and drab dress. The remote viewer suffers plenty. As such, with misery cascading like a spring waterfall, and no available hooked up spigot for turn-off shutdown, RVs have little recourse but to focus foremost on removing themselves from an existence grown intolerably bleak and forbidding and wholly terrifying. Although various maniacal autocratic types will always insist otherwise, claiming the boot of oppression don't fit anyone around these parts, it's plain enough. Experienced pain is community property. The causative deeds are born secret, and secrets beget regime change, which is, of course, dirty, nasty business. Remote viewers are all about departure, so no surprise that sketching themselves into dream scenes and elsewhere settings is the understood priority. Experienced remote viewers recognize that transport to wherever is eased when in a hypnagogic state, what clinicians describe as a numbed condition occurring between sleep and wakefulness, but where the individual is still able to count change and eat yellow cake from a plate if desirous to do so. Because Hiram is the wiry, mistrusting type and a lover of baked goods to boot, it keeps a bug-out bag packed, anchoring himself to the world in such a way that he's hardly anchored at all. He functions in a state of enduring disquiet and has grown accustomed to it over the years. His standard MO, sensing a trigger click of bitter words and aggression about to be leveled his way, Hiram mutes the moment and deadens the senses. Inhalations and pulse slow as he fades from the field, and in a silent moment is gone, drifting well above the form storm like indifferent smoke, but always with a bristling glad to be gone sensation. According to classified manuals, the process works something like this. The RV's mind ideates a point in time. Concentrated eye focuses destination along with several feasible windows of penetration. Like, say, for instance, Catoosa County, the town of Ringo, sometime between 1910 waning summer dog bite feasting afternoon and several years later sinking of the Lusitania. And then when what he determines to be the optimal crash through moment arrives, he propels himself through one of the marked portals. And like the journeyman horologists say, exactitude is for celebrity chefs, assassins, and other compulsives, which may or may not be true, but for sure is an overvalued virtue. If, for instance, an RV arrives at a distant destination several hours, days, weeks, months, or even some years ahead of schedule, so be it. Relatedly, should movement present as a retreat into a long gone era, short time the remote viewer can't always kill time by taking in a ball game. Make it across town to Old Forbes Field in pending availability, score a bleacher seat for Game 7 of the 60 series. But if sold out, which almost certainly will be the case, hot-footed over to CMU, post up atop the Cathedral of Learning with squeezed tight staff and students, and relive the wild kid thrill of Mazeroski's climatic clout, walk off in the home half night. Whatever the selection, the main thing is that at least for a period, the remote viewer slipped free and clear of an injurious cycle, with no more secret signs, codes, or passwords to hinder relief and quietude are sure to follow. Once settled, he cultivates a network of like-minded friends and acquaintances, a host of other defining essentials of self and prosperity follow. Credit and career, mail in the box, money in the bank, a new used car he gets from a man for a grant, and the love he learned from a tuxedo cat on the lap, to reference a few. Blink twice, and it's Depression era in 1933. Hoovervilles, migrant camps, bread lines and soup kitchens, grimy children in tattered clothing, bank failures, rampant unemployment. And there's Hiram strolling a wooded path in Warm Springs, Georgia. He's sipping bottled cola and RC and eating a moon pie. Up ahead, a clearing and a mineral pool. Anachronistic scuba gear scattered around, tanks and regulators, masks, flippers, and a spear gun. And FDR himself, Chancing Jansen, whom Hiram overhears say to his near nurse sister D, "How many dang times I gotta tell you, sis, it wasn't my crack pipe." As she and the two male attendants ease his paralytic body into the quartzite warm, though later verified specious spring waters, which is to say the runoff's vaunted therapeutic capacity proved less than hype. So no public polio limb healing for Frankie. A firm flash forward, and with the sizzle of decades, locates Hiram off a rural road, slinging hash at the Hampton Cafe, where he knows all the regulars and they know him. "Morning, Judah," says Hiram to septuagenarian Mississippi State Senator Emeritus Judah Reed, as the old-time segregators, still with the wistful and racist head-crack reveries of wielded nightsticks, snarling wolf dogs and high-pressure fire hoses, heaves himself onto a counter seat, hooking his cane on the back. Since leaving office, the former six-term legislator stops in for waffles and chicken every morning. Challenging Hiram. "Tell me something I don't know, brother." "Your missus is getting you bike shorts for your birthday," says Hiram. "Lucky for you, they're the 10-panel bib variety, Italian styling too, with enhanced airflow, silicone leg grippers, and superior compression. Plus, they're quick wicking should things go really wrong really fast. How's that sound?" As usual, Hiram, you've left me speechless. Further up the timeline, there's Hiram alighted in northern Spain. It's mid-September, the sky is leaden, and he's on the mist-steeped upper slopes of the Angrilou, covering the Queen stage of the 2021 Vuelta for Chatelaine magazine, jotting down impressions on a notepad. Riders these days lack any sense of style. I've never seen such hideous kits in all my life. Print and dye offend the eye, hawk all sorts of pedestrian, corporate, and state-controlled equipage you hear about or see on display in any world on any day of the week. So I need to plaster about it across every projected skin-tight garment. Shorts, tights, jerseys, vests, jackets, gloves, etc. have all been slathered with sponsor logos. It's like those sublimated inks collude to goad them garments to bark on command. From French aperitifs, Belgian beers and cigarettes, American soft drinks, laxatives and sunblocks, fine Italian salamis and espresso machines, to Swiss pharmaceuticals, German telecommunication services, British petroleum products, and various household gadgets could come from here. But seriously, I see one of these big-time pros shelled off the back of the Peloton, look like a bag of bones, face strained white as ocean foam, suffering like a mangy dog. What? I'm supposed to feel empathy for him and dash out and buy a sponsored bagless vacuum cleaner? Quite the contrary. For is something like a simple bicycle ride through breathtaking mountainscapes can cause a purported world-class athlete to suffer a total physical and psychic breakdown. It's also possible he sponsors AC systems or his engine additives or whatever happened to be getting plugged Gonna do the same. So surely I'd be wise to shop around before bestowing my trust with a monetary investment. Risky tenant status. On traveling stratagems, Hiram has this to say. Here's the deal, man, at least my approach. Whatever the destination, wherever I'm bound, I just try and get close. 200 to 300 kilometers out is sufficient. It's easy enough to hitch in from an outer limit. The precise instant of touchdown matters little either, although it's always preferable to arrive at the terminus in time for happy hour. And all that Hiram has left behind, he's left behind time and again, like the forever shape-shifting shacks, shops, houses, and other various stand-around constructs that waste space and suck up energy, plus the disposed storm aboard forms who pin him knives in the back on treacherous sheets of black ice that arrive special delivery via express freight carrier and that he also signed for at the door because he can imagine no other alternative. The sum total of old labors stepped forward to confound, tie movement into tight knots, pulling H up and down stair flights, along corridors whose winding links go and go, get gas, recover, then go some more, but never cease, diving into and out of expansive rooms and offices, jammed with maximum cubicles affixed with workstation accoutrements and doors. So many doors, every 3 feet another door and more voices, and all the while Hiram feel the floor shift and reorder beneath his feet like keyboard drag and drop shortcuts until he can stand no more and is jettisoned into an empty lot, and the world to him goes dead like gray Christmas Day at twilight, with the suburban streets drawn cold and stark with no one around, no kids or new kid bikes, no cars, no color to the yards, and everything boarded up tight. The 7-Eleven in Arco Station, the diners and cafes, can't even get a drip coffee or a Korean cruller. And the strung high wire above overwhelm a fixed Hiram frown say, does this feel familiar? Ancillary scene. There's Hiram at the Big Canoe Fitness Center exercising with an attractive young Pilates instructor, Donna Dodson, Harvard 2018, who's sporting fashions by Capizio and Morella. She stretches the long, lithe muscles of her lower back, then leans forward to work the hamstrings. Long, lustrous auburn ringlets frame a wet dream kisser. Still with the trouble at home, Mr. Poteet asked Donna. Trouble deep, Donna, trouble deep, confides Hiram. Broken machines and appliances in the yard and more damage piled at the door. Regrettable, Mr. Poteet, says Donna, but as I've told you repeatedly in previous sessions, this is a gym and I'm a trainer, not a shrink. Your situation, too, is also far from unique. Donna tugs at the crotch of yoked pink pants, then reaches both arms high and over. Body-hugging Cool Max and a pretty paisley pant have their value too, and you could use some mat. Be realistic, Hiram. No timeline that I'm familiar with can support the heft you carry. Keep doing what you're doing, and you'll cave in existence, cause tidal floods, and louse things up for everyone. Now suck it up, you fat fuck, and go get me a Diet Coke. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I feel like there's so much voice that comes through, even in just that one, pretty short excerpt. So there's a lot more to dig into, I think. Reading next today is Marianna Boncek. Marianna is an author, scholar, and educator. She holds an MFA in creative writing from Mississippi University for Women and a PhD from Union Institute and University. She is the author of several nonfiction books and a young adult novel. Her poems and stories have appeared in many journals and anthologies, and several of her plays have been featured in the Hudson Valley Short Play Festival. She lives in New York's Hudson Valley with her partner, Dave. Learn more at www.mariannaboncek.com. In Diamond City, it's 1955 when a small town police chief, Art, is thrown into a world of danger and mystery when he is tasked with solving a gruesome murder in an isolated mountain cult. Despite feeling out of his depth, Art becomes the only person the cult members trust, but things take a turn for the worse when, in a single night, Art loses everything he holds dear. Marianna, the virtual podium is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate this. What I've decided to read today is when you buy a video, you get the bonus features and the bonus scenes. Well, I'm going to be reading a bonus scene that isn't in the book. It was originally a prologue in which the character Rita, she is a child in the first part of the story and an adult in the second part of the novel, tells you the history of Lake Paradise. So this is Rita, and she talks quite differently than me. So it takes a little while to get into her voice. They call this place Lake Paradise. And that mountain over there, they call it Hog Mountain. But that ain't the way it always was. You see, once Lake Paradise was called Lake Hachitonk. It got its name from the damming of the Hachitonk River that flows right down off that mountain through the Hachitonk Pass. A man named Hog Martin dammed it up to run his mills, and sometime in the early 1800s, it ain't clear how he got the land, if you get my drift, but it appears Martin arrived here like Moses arriving in the promised land with his wife and a passel of children. It weren't nothing but dense forest in that river when he got here. They say he was the kind of man who grabbed opportunity when he saw it, but I don't know much about that, because he was long dead before I arrived on the scene. I seen a picture of him in the local library. Every once in a while, they hang up all the local history pictures they got in the archive, put them on display for people to take a look at. He was this short little stocky man shaped like a barrel. His flesh flowed from his chin to his upper chest like lava. He had no real neck, leastway none I could see. He had a flat nose and these tremendous round eyes that stuck out like a bulldog's. His head was completely bald, and his two ears, well, that is how he got his name, I am sure. They were triangle shaped and stuck out of the sides of his head. I don't believe in making fun of people based on their appearance, but there is no doubt about how he got his name. Like I said, he dammed up the Hachitonk River for use in his mill. It made him rich. At first, it was just a little mill pond, but he kept expanding, and eventually it became a long lake. It extends up 5 miles, they say, through the valley. The only way you can get up there is in a canoe or a kayak. I've been up there myself, but they say it sure is pretty. It flooded the entire North Hachitonk Pass. That dam closed off all the prime woodland. It also closed in the diamonds, but he didn't know he was doing that at the time. Hog Martin built a huge farmhouse on the shores of his lake. He named the place Martindale. They say it was eventually inhabited by about 50 families, most who worked directly for Martin in the forest, or later tended his beef cattle that he bred by his own secret methods. But don't you know it, just when Hog Martin was his richest, he died. They say it was a massive heart attack while he was pitching hay. At least that's the official version. Mrs. Martin knew he died in the hay all right, but it was with the wife of one of his newest farmhands. But who knows, like I said, that was before my time. Mrs. Martin was glad to get the hell out of there. It is pretty, but it sure is isolated. Here's the kicker. No one know where they went. All them children and the missus just bam, gone. And no one ever found out where they went. I'm sure with a name like Martin, it would be hard to trace. Unfortunately, with no big farm to keep up, the people started to leave Martindale. Like I said, it was real isolated. Unless you lived off the land, there was no point in staying out there, no matter how pretty it was. All those farm buildings just fell into disrepair. The fields got overgrown. It started to grow wild again. Sometime in the early 1900s, this son of a railroad millionaire, Elliott Campbell, stumbled on the place. Old Lester Cummings, not the son but the father, was a farmer turned hunting guide for the rich. He was the one that brung Campbell out there. You know, old Lester made more money leading those rich boys all around the mountain so that they could shoot deer or look at birds than he ever did farming. I never quite understood it myself. This Campbell was a lot like Hog Martin. He took one look at all that beauty and thought he'd make his own little village too. I guess that's the rich for you. But Campbell didn't have the business sense like Martin. He saw this area as a playground for him and his friends. It was a bit on the wild side, if you know what I mean, especially during Prohibition. Things got a little crazy up there. Like Martin, it ain't clear how Campbell got his hands on the land, but he had money, or at least his father did. One look at that bowl-shaped valley with that beautiful lake, and they say Campbell pictured himself greeting guests up from the city in their motor cars. He created a utopia of nature lovers, artists, musicians, and all that love the good life, or so he said. I didn't make that up. I read that in the town history book. But what I hear, it was really about decadence. They say that Campbell would sport women's clothing. I hear that once he greeted his guests all done up as one of those geisha girls. They say that picture is in the library too, but I noticed no one hangs that one up. Campbell's the one that named this place Lake Paradise, and it stuck. You can go down and see the farmhouse. He added on to it, made it a full-scale mansion. They say it's got 10 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom, but I've never been in it. Someone from the city bought it, and now it's a bed and breakfast called the Lake Paradise Inn. Campbell built his own little village like he was in the city. He made blocks. Isn't that hilarious? He made a grid out of roads. It's just 2 roads long and 6 wide. The blocks aren't big, nothing like a real city. Then he had all these cottages built for his guests. He painted them every color you can imagine, not real house colors. They were painted blue, pink, purple, lavender, no two the exact same. Of course, the pictures from that time are all black and white, but I imagined it looked pretty silly. Here's the kicker. The people who came up here designed their own outhouses. Of course, there was no electricity or indoor plumbing until well after the Depression. You couldn't get lines through the South Hotchitong Pass. Not only were their outhouses painted in those crazy colors, but they painted designs on them too. Flowers, mountains, portraits, you name it. They painted those things on the outhouses. They still have them that way. You can go out and see them. They say the inside of the outhouses are just as elaborate as the outsides. Some had wood-burning stoves, powder rooms, or waiting rooms. Several were 2 or 3 seaters. I've seen some pictures in some magazines down in the library. I don't know if they use them anymore, but they're still there. Lake Paradise was only open for June, July, and August, and they were all summer people. Things got so busy up there that he built a little store, a theater, and a community center. They say that in its prime, over 1,000 people came up here in the summer. I find that a little hard to believe because all of Lincoln County only has about 7,000 people, being so isolated in these mountains and all. The locals were never invited to any of the parties. Oh, they were good enough to be maids and groundskeepers and things like that. Can't really fault them though. Gave the locals some jobs in the summer. My mother was a prep cook in the mansion when she was a teenager. You want to hear some wild stories about going on, you should talk to her. But it ended when Campbell stepped in front of one of his father's trains. They say the family financial manager stole all their money and left him broke. That was before that big stock market crash that probably would have finished them off if they made it that far. The family sold the place to some arms dealer, Herbert Deller. He came and bought up the whole place. He probably had been one of the party boys. He fixed the place up to the resort it is now for city people. He don't own it anymore. They sort of have parceled it off, but it was because of Deller they found them people up there in the mountains. They say Campbell knew about those people, but there ain't no record of it. It wasn't until the late 1920s they found them. Deller hired 2 surveyors. He wasn't like Martin and Campbell. He wanted a clear deed to the land, so he was having the whole place surveyed. Those surveyors came up on these people way up there. It seems when Martin clogged up the North Pass to the Hotchitong, he also blocked off their only clear way out of there. They lived up there, God knows how long, all by themselves. Now, I knew a few of them in the later years, but I can't tell you too much about them. They kept to themselves mostly. They were the oddest looking people you ever saw. Their skin was a sandy color, though some of them could be quite dark, particularly in the summer. They say they were descendants of slaves, and just by looking at them, I think that isn't too hard to figure out. But they had some white in them too. They say they had Indian in them, and that seemed clear because they wore moccasins and leather pants. I've been told they were a jumble of runaway slaves, Indians, escaped Irish convicts from the big prison break in Clayton County in 1852, and anyone else that stumbled upon them up there. A man come from the state university once to give a talk at the library. He said because they were so isolated up there that they actually created their own ethnic group. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but except you can sure tell one of them if you see them. They all had this red hair, every shade you can imagine, brown skin with these huge freckles, and of course those eyes. Their eyes were green and blue and so light sometimes you wondered if their eyes had color at all. A few of them had really bright colors, as if they weren't real. They had this leader, Father Abraham. That wasn't his real name. I can't remember his real name except his last name. Everyone knows that name. It was Diamond. They said Father Abraham was a preacher, but I heard he was really a snake oil salesman, if you know what I mean. They say he was running from a farmer whose daughter mysteriously became pregnant after several healing sessions with the preacher. Just like everyone else in this part of the country, Diamond grabbed at an opportunity when he saw it. Those mountain people were hard-working, simple people. That preacher imagined himself having a kingdom on the hill. Guess everyone is a bit like that, wanting their own slice of the pie. He went and evangelized them, but not with any regular religion, but his own kind of Christianity, which no one ever heard of. Not that it has a name or anything. The problem was that after too many years, Diamond started to believe his own message. It really wasn't bad for them in the long run. He sort of organized them. The community continued on pretty well. Once the surveyors came back with a story about these redheaded people who spoke their own language and had webbed hands and feet, they sent some forest rangers up there. Once they figured out the stories were true, the only thing the town elders over in Fosterdale seemed to be worried about is that these people had no schooling for their children. Can you imagine? No one could read or write except Father Abraham. They agreed to send the kids to school if the town left them alone to live their lives in peace. For a while, that deal worked out, of course, until it didn't. And we know how that ended up. The first group of Diamond children, 27 in all, was delivered to a waiting school bus on the first day of school in 1930. They had to put a road in just to get them down off the hill. It wasn't a real road, just a dirt sort of path at the end of Lake Paradise up the mountain. Someone took a tractor up there and made enough of a path to get a truck up there if they had to. Later, the Diamonds bought a farm truck to get up and down the hill. They used to come to town every once in a while. They'd sell fruit, vegetables, handcrafts, stuff like that. Anyway, when the kids got to school, they didn't know how old any of them was because they didn't keep birth records. The kids they sent to school were somewhere between 5 or so for the smallest ones, with the oldest ones about 16. Here's the kicker. When the woman in the office went to register them, they all had different mothers, but they said that Father Abraham was their father. Can you imagine? You know what the townspeople thought about a claim like that. All the girls wore the same long prairie dresses, same style, every one. Now they were well constructed and all. Someone up there could really sew, but they were all faded and made from scraps and flour sacks. The girls wore beaded moccasins with no socks. The boys' clothes were pretty much in the same state as the girls. Their pants were patched all over. Some of them wore leather or denim. They didn't wear belts, just tied them at the waist with a rope. They wore these shirts without collars, and they were made like a patchwork quilt, no two the same. They wore moccasins like the girls. Every single one of them had red hair, every shade you could imagine. The little girls wore 2 braids, and the older girls wore 1 braid. The boys had real long hair like it was never cut. They combed it back and tied it at the nape of their neck with a rawhide. Here's another thing hard to believe. When they arrived at school, they had their own language. Some people claimed it was part Indian, part King James Bible English. You had to listen really close to understand them. Not that they spoke much. Those poor little kids were terrified when they first arrived at school. Everything just confounded them. Pencils, papers, flush toilets, electric lights, forks. First, the children wouldn't even sit on the chairs. You'd offer them one and they'd politely refuse. They'd rather squat in the aisle between the desks than sit in a chair. They were very obedient children. They never gave the teacher any trouble, but they always seemed so confused. They smelled too, a little bit of body odor and wood smoke. Their attendance was spotty at best. Seems their mamas always needed them at home for chores. Most learned some reading and writing, a little math before disappearing for good. It was sad in a way, but they seemed like happy kids. Shy, but happy. There ain't no more of them. Things like that never end well. But of course, you know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianna. And I feel like there's just so much good voice in all the readings today. And I absolutely love, that we got this sort of sneak peek into, a quote unquote deleted scene, like you mentioned from the DVDs. Well, thank you again so much. Our final reader for today is Sharon Steeber. Little did Sharon know where enrolling in a Spanish course back in high school would lead. Years later, she went on to raise her children between central Mexico and California. She still divides her time between the two countries, and now retired, she taught college English and co-authored a series of textbooks, Reading Faster and Understanding More, books 1, 2, and 3, 2 of which went through 5 editions. She has also published a family saga, The Jews, and magazine and newspaper advice columns for teenagers before she even had any. More recently, she has had several short plays produced. For more, visit the website sharonsteeber.com. Rosie Logan hopes learning Spanish deep in Mexico will be the rocket fuel her stagnant newspaper career needs. Dr. Juan Ramon Villaseñor, cynical director of an impoverished clinic in a small pueblo, reveals more of local realities than Rosie is perhaps ready to know. Their ideals draw them to each other's worlds, but Rosie and Juan Ramon are stymied over and over by confounding codes in those worlds, along with his controlling father and her single mother. With that, let's hear more now from Sharon herself. Oh, Sharon, just make sure that you're unmuted as well.
Hi, it's great to see so many friendly and known faces. This title has the word locura in it, and that in Spanish is related to the word loco, and it can mean to you love me with crazy love, with passionate enthusiasm. This scene is when Rosie, the journalist, is trying to get this doctor, Juan Ramon, to take her out into the countryside so she can do her research. And there are a couple there's another doctor involved in this too. Okay, the fragrant smell of tortillas signaled we were nearing a tortilleria. A line of aproned women bearing buckets or baskets on their arms stretched to the corner. At the head of the line, a tortilla machine was flipping out flat cornmeal rounds like newly minted coins. How fitting they should resemble giant versions of the 1,000 peso piece. Tortillas, the golden coin of the realm. The doctor paused in front of a wooden gate adjacent to the tortilla factory. He tugged on a rope protruding through a hole in the gate, and on the other side, a bell tinkled. We waited almost a full minute without speaking. It's hard to make small talk when you know you have to translate it all into another language, and it's never going to come out the same. Pleasant chit-chat goes in, garbled stiffness with possible international affront comes out. Nothing small about that talk. A stout woman in a green checked apron sprung the door open. Her hair stood out from her head like Medusa's snakes, but her face was open and welcoming. Pasen, pasen, por favor, she scolded, as if we had been lingering outside the gate sneaking a smoke. Her snakes bobbled as she hurried us forward. Behind the tortilleria rose a steep slope of some 10 or 12 feet. We marched up the stepping stones, engulfed by an abundance of ferns and flowers on both sides. The untrimmed growth bestowed on the old single-story pink house at the top of the rise an aura of benign neglect. The woman waved us toward the front door. El doctor is on the patio. She then turned and disappeared into the lush greenery at the side of the house. Judging from the thickness of the foliage, I half expected to hear machete sounds as she took her leave into the bush. Dr. Villaseñor led the way across a small, formal living room with the whiff of a museum about it. Here the furniture was in the style of some French king who liked porcelain figurines and red brocade upholstery. I never could keep those Louis and their chair legs straight. All was tranquil, spotless, in order, and uninhabited. We continued straight through the salon and out the French doors onto a central patio. I had just traversed from the jungles of Mexico to old Europe and now entered colonial Mexico. Dr. Villaseñor addressed what appeared to be an empty patio. Buenos dias, doctor, he called out to the old walls and worn paving stones. A tall, thin man shot up from behind an iron table. As we drew closer, I saw he had been squatting next to a green garden hose that undulated across the patio and disappeared behind the table. The two men shook hands, embraced, and, as if on cue, administered each other 2 brisk pats on the back. Dr. Villaseñor turned to me. Señorita Rosie Logan, Dr. Eugenio Padilla. The hand of Dr. Eugenio zoomed out to meet mine. You are most welcome to Ismilco, he said in English, then cradled my hand in both of his. I most humbly put myself at your service. Such flowery language. I hoped he wouldn't bow. I might feel compelled to do the same or dip into a curtsy. To forestall any bending on his part, I quickly stated my purpose for being in Ismilco. I felt a bit of a liar since I hadn't originally come to Mexico for that reason. A journalist? American? He smiled at Dr. Villaseñor with more pleasure than I thought the fact warranted. That's a reference to an earlier scene in which he said American women only want 2 things, money and orgasms. Dr. Villaseñor was grinning back. Dr. Eugenio toned down his smile as he said, I will be most happy to help you however I may. You must know our country wears many faces. I can show you some of those faces, but you must convince Juan Ramon, he nodded toward his friend, to take you to the rural communities with him. Oh, do you think that would be possible? I said, no longer minding that I might sound cynical. Dr. Eugenio bent over and picked up the garden hose. In the communities of the countryside, you will see our living past. That's something you won't find so easily in the tourist zones of the big cities. As if he just remembered himself, he said, Señorita, please sit down. Forgive me. I have just a little chore to finish. In the distance, the church bells started again with their taunting code. Dr. Eugenio knelt with one knee on the stone and began to fidget with the top of a plastic bag. While his hands were busy, he looked up at Dr. Villaseñor. Should I call him Juan Ramon now that Dr. Eugenio had referred to him that way? You remember Señorita Araiza? It was kind of him to address Dr. Juan Ramon in English for my benefit. Juan Ramon nodded. So he must understand some English. But what I was really interested in was what Dr. Eugenio was going to say about the woman. I pulled out my notebook. Maybe I would at last be able to gather information today after all. I operated on her this morning. Tomorrow I have to go to the laboratory in Cuernavaca. As he spoke, he shook the contents of the plastic bag and upended it. Something reddish pink, like a cut of meat, did a slow motion slide into his left hand. Excuse me, doctor, I said, posed to write. What is that? Once I could see it better, I thought it looked like an organ from a large animal. Is that some kind of body part? Dr. Eugenio turned on the hose and sprayed water over the thing in his hand. This, he said with a detached air, all doctor now, this, senorita, is a uterus. Only days before, I had flinched when I saw a woman being operated on in the hospital. This time, I willed myself not to look away. No, that's not true. What's true is that I couldn't make myself look away. A uterus from I was at loss for words in my own language. Juan Ramon finished the thought. From a woman, of course. The two doctors were both looking at me with an expression that told me they just might be savoring this moment. There they stood, neither seeming to consider the situation worthy of undue remark. See, Dr. Eugenio said, becoming the clinician and slipping back into Spanish as he gained inspiration. See, here's the opening. He stretched with his fingers the rubbery aperture at one end of the fleshy sac. He then extended the uterus on the wet stone. There it lay like a slab of meat for tonight's dinner. Woman demystified. I couldn't bring myself to look at Juan Ramon to allow him to see my shock. I stared at the female organ in silence. This other doctor was obviously a gynecologist, and I knew I was missing a chance to interview him about his patients and birth control. On the other hand, an extracted uterus was, if ever there was one, a completely reliable form of birth control. We have no laboratory here in this Milco, Juan Ramon said, maybe feeling my silence needed ministering to. Later this afternoon, Eugenio will go to Cuernavaca and have the uterus analyzed. Analyzed, I said. Analyzed for what? Analysis seemed beside the point now. Dr. Eugenio took over again for the tumor that is growing on it. He picked up the uterus and stretched it toward me as if an offering. See, there it is. The uterus lay in his open palm just inches from my face. That yellow part? I pointed and sought a scientific tone of detachment to match theirs. He beamed at me as if I were a smart student. Yes, that's the tumor. That's why I had to remove this uterus. I stared at it. My feigned detachment crumbled. The disembodied piece of meat now assumed a body. I pictured a distraught woman, full dark hair framing her face. Was she young? I had to ask, to address some inchoate uneasiness inside me. 31. I imagined a face not much different from my own. The woman's eyes were marked with shadows. She was too young to lose her womb. Somewhere in Izmilco, a woman lay crying despite the midday sunshine because she had lost her womb. The woman had considered herself young and immortal. Her face was firm and unlined. She had thought to have more time. Juan Ramon said, I just had an idea, if it would not be too much of an imposition. Senorita Rosie will be taking the bus back to Cuernavaca this very afternoon. He was addressing both me and Dr. Eugenio in what I considered an unctuous tone. Perhaps she would not mind doing us a big favor. Perhaps she could deliver the package to the laboratory for you. Package, I said. The uterus, said Dr. Juan Ramon. The lab is just a couple of blocks from Aida's school, your school. All I needed now, I thought, was to hear those damn bells again. Then, because it was exactly 12 noon, the bells broke into a garrulous and indecipherable frenzy, as if speaking in tongues. Now, that's one scene. The next scene I'm going to read is further on in the story, and the housekeeper with the snaky hair is in this scene. Her name is Imelda. We were coming into a community. We stopped in front of an unpainted red brick house like the hundreds I had seen since arriving in Mexico. Imelda placed her hand at the small of my back and guided me to the door. You must not struggle so. You are a person of too much thinking all the time, no? No, I mean, yes. I mean, I don't know. Minutes later, I was lying eyes closed atop a green chenille bedspread on what I assumed was Imelda's marital bed. Outside a window high in the wall, treetops tossed in the wind with azure sky beyond. I knew a chicken had run into the room when I heard it cluck, and the aroma of the black pig in the pen just outside the door wafted in. Imelda began to trace over my clothed body with a branch of pirul, what in California we call a pepper tree. I lay perfectly still and allowed myself to close my eyes. Could some kind of subconscious impulse have propelled me to this dim place that smelled of pirul and melting candle wax and a pinch of pig? Olympia indeed. Olympia is a cleansing in folk medicine. Imelda had not asked, but I wondered what I might want to cleanse from my life. I didn't intend to go along with this, but suddenly the word career appeared. I had once looked up the word career in the dictionary. It derives from carriera, from the old Provençal language, and refers literally to my road. As I lay there, I acknowledged my road was as flat as an Iowa interstate. I stole a peek at Imelda, now fully curandera, that's the healer. She was anointing the branches of the pepper tree with what I took to be herbed water. To her side stood a pregnant girl who had silently joined us. The pregnant girl balanced a white plate with 3 eggs rolling slowly side to side. She seemed to be a sous chef to the curandera's ministrations. Imelda continued feathering the pirul branch up and down my outstretched body. Fragrant water wafted into the air and mixed with the other scents, hot candle wax, pirul, chicken, pig, musty brick. Imelda began to pray in a low, rapid chant. I closed my eyes again and tried to give in to the experience. My career could do with Olympia after all. What other memories should this limpia scrub? I dug deeper into the dirty clothes hamper. I didn't like to think of him, but there was my father who, now dead or alive, I didn't know, had bowed out of my life early on, leaving only the residual smell of gin and cigarettes. In quick succession came Monty, that's a past boyfriend, then my gnawing realization that I might not be relationship material. Like my mother and her mother before her, I would sail my adult life in a single passage cabin. Oh, Mama, she must be missing me and worried. I drifted, and then suddenly I pictured the marks of age that had claimed my mother's face and were starting to claim mine. Imelda was right. I did think too much. She took hold of my left wrist. You must not struggle so, she said again, gently, then let go and began to make light rubbing motions over me with one of the unbroken eggs, then the next and the next. The eggs will draw out the bad things that trouble you. I expected to feel something happening, but I didn't. I tried to visualize the bad things, amorphous as amoebas, streaming out of me and into the beckoning eggs. If anything, though, I only surged with resistance. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sharon. And I feel like it's always nice to be able to sort of experience this kind of almost like, I mean, it's a multicultural experience that the character is going through, but then also us, and to have you there kind of explaining these things a little bit and a little bit of the background. I really love that. So thank you so much. So at this point, we have time for our audience Q&A. We've got about 10 minutes. So if you have a question for one or more of our authors, go ahead and type that in the chat and I will make sure it gets asked. I've actually already received a question that I want to pose to all 3 of you. Interestingly, all three of your books feature small communities or small towns. Um, the question is wondering, was there a draw to this kind of community or lifestyle that made you want to write a book using that setting in particular, or did it sort of come about organically based on the story that you set out to tell? Maybe Marianna, if you wanted to start us off with that one.
Sure, no problem. It's strange how things grow out of something else. I had originally started to work on a short story collection that what I had taken was childhood memories that, and you know how we don't quite remember things as they really happened as children. And so I was writing stories like fictionalizing endings and making sense. And all of a sudden I had written that scene where, if you, I'm sure many of you haven't read the book because it just came out, where Art and Becky meet for the first time. And after I wrote that scene, I'm like, these two people have a story. So that's, the book literally grew out of one scene between the two characters. So
Yeah, so kind of starting with this really microcosm
yeah.
of or seed of the story and seeing what blossomed from there. Stephen, wanting to hear from you as well, was there a draw to this small town or small community or lifestyle that made you want to write about it, or something else? And you may need to unmute first, Stephen.
There we go.
Yes.
The answer is no. I a lot of these sections in this book I had started well before I actually completed the book. They were just in kind of in pieces, and I tend to write, I guess, with darker imagery, the scenes that I constructed, the characters that I constructed. They're kind of off the grid. It's a darker landscape, but it's also a funny landscape. And coming up with a town name, I don't remember coming up with the town name. I have no idea at what point that happened, but when I started piecing the book together, it seemed like, oh, okay, well, Bucksnort, that seems like a reasonable name for a town, a lot of dark stuff happening. And anybody that's spent time in small towns know that it's not always what it's cracked up to be. I mean, you can go through a checkout lane and everybody's smiling and saying, welcome to our little town. But there's always a lot more stuff going on. And I guess I have trouble trusting a lot of that information. So that's the roundabout answer.
Yeah, but definitely this kind of sometimes you have to see where the writing takes you, even if it's against your intentions to start out with, and just sort of
Yeah.
let that play out. And Sharon, also wanting to hear from you, how are you, or what was your relationship to this idea of a smaller community or smaller lifestyle?
I didn't consciously think about that, about it being a smaller community, but of course it was. When I went to live in Mexico, it was so fascinating. As one character in the passage I just read said, Mexico has many faces, and there's so many aspects to Mexico. And so there would be the colonial aspects, the Spanish overlay of everything. But you go out of the big city, and then you go out of a middle-sized town as well, and you go out into the countryside, and it's something else again. And it is fascinating, the way that there are worlds within worlds within worlds. And that's what, consciously or unconsciously, that's what interested me.
Yeah, definitely. Just thinking about, the phrase, oh, it's a small world when you come across these coincidences of, interacting with people out there, but how much of it is coincidence and how much of it is those worlds colliding?
Yeah.
Um, we have another question for all three of you. This person is curious about the writing process for each of you. Was the final product similar to what you first started out writing, or did it diverge quite a bit? Stephen, do you want to kick us off on this one?
Yeah, the final version, I was really happy with the way it finally all came together. I guess there was a period where I struggled with whether or not I could put all these sections together that made some sort of sense for me. And whether or not it ends up making sense for everyone else is not really important at this point, because it seems like it seems like a whole piece to me, and I like the way I assembled it. The pieces were, they were just written kind of haphazard, and the time came to try to put the pieces together. And I really, the way I did that, I just printed all the sections out and put them on the floor, and then just started picking the sections up in some order that seemed to make sense to me. And the weird thing was that I think the final order wasn't that much different than the way that I had written all of the scenes and all of the different actions. So in a sense, it was kind of like the book organized itself, maybe even wrote itself. Maybe I had just a small part of the whole input. But yeah, I just happy with the way the final product came out. So
Yeah, definitely tying back to this idea of maybe the book is leading the way.
yeah, I
Um,
think that's a good point. Yeah.
Jumping to Sharon, was the final product of your book similar to what you first started out writing, or is it quite different?
Well, the process started back in the 90s. I really should cover my face when I say this because it's shameful, but it started so long ago. And then I would put it away, and then I would come back to it, and then I'd put it away. And this went on for decades. And so during lockdown, I ran out of excuses. I mean, I thought, okay, it's now or never. If I don't do it now, if I don't finish this, then what is my excuse? So I had in the process, as writers do, move scenes. Certain scenes went to the front of the book, certain scenes went to the back. So it became different in some ways, but still in others, and oh, by the way, and I didn't quite know how it was going to end for sure, you know, until I did it. But in terms of being pleased, yes, I'm pleased, but I think there's something about writers, we're never totally satisfied. I mean, I look at it and I think, even when in the copy editing process, thinking, why did I use, why, I wish I could move that further up, or I wish I could cut that now, or I wish I could add another bit of information there. It's like you can't leave it alone. You pick at it and you pick at it. And so, so pleased, yes, I'm pleased that I let go of it. That was the big accomplishment.
Yeah, that difficulty of letting go is all too relatable, I think, for pretty much every writer. But I'm so happy to hear, at this point, it was, it feels worth it, and you are happy with the product. And just to round out this question, Marianna, was the final product of Diamond City similar to what you first started out writing, or very different?
I think the story always stayed the same. One thing that I sometimes struggle with is which character should best tell the story. And of course, it changes depending on from whose point of view the story is told. And that's ultimately why this little chapter that I read was cut, because it's not Rita's story, it's Art's story. So the story has always been the same. But I think, like I said, it would depend on what character I had chosen to tell the story, how it would have been told, and what would have been the main points and those kind of things. And because I'm a planner and I spend a tremendous amount of time getting to know each character, that sometimes I get a little, lost getting to know the characters. But once I realized it was Art's story, then Art told the story, and I just had to write down what he was what he was telling me. So yeah.
I love that we're continually hearing this idea of the author, or sorry, the book sort of leading the way, leading the author by hand. Um, we now have a question for Stephen. This is from Rhonda. With so many rich characters, voices, and scenes, how did you weave them together for a cohesive, larger story? I know you sort of started to answer that question with your last response, but maybe if you wanted to elaborate on that a bit.
Well, again, there are over 200 characters in this book, and most of them are only there for a few pages. And so I never felt like, other than the protagonist, that there was going to be one character that was going to be followed through the whole book. I just really enjoyed writing the individual scenes and kind of bits and scenarios that make up the book, because in my mind it's all comedy, and it was fun to come up with the names of the characters, and it was fun to get them talking to one another. And so it wasn't some complicated process. It was just sitting down daily to work on the book. And that's the one main thing I think I did consistently work on this book every day. Pretty much I sat down and worked on a few pages, and the sections, as I said, they came together almost without any ordering from me. So I don't know if that answered Rhonda's question, but it's the best I can do right now. Thanks for the question, Rhonda.
Totally fine. I think the characters sort of make the cohesion for themselves, even if it's not, premeditated in a way, it sounds like. We have one last question. This is for Marianna. After reading your book, there appears to be a theme around the conscious and the unconscious, and how the characters become more aware of their memories over time. Do you have certain experience with the metaphysical that helped you with this writing approach?
Isn't writing metaphysical? I have to, and my experience in writing, and I've talked to a lot of writers who feel that there's some sort of, if we want to call that, metaphysical connection to their characters, whether they're real or not. And I think it's your unconscious working on your novel when you're working on something else. But I often have dreams, particularly when I am in a sticking point in the novel, like I don't know what's going to happen next, or I don't, the characters, I will dream and they will let me know what's supposed to come next. And I jokingly tell my students that once we create characters, we now have a moral obligation to give them their life, because if we don't finish the story, they don't get to, live and tell their stories. But we can call that metaphysical. And I think there is a part of that, but I feel when I'm writing a story, particularly when I'm in the midst of it, that there is something that is working in your brain that you might not be conscious of. And that's why when we're in the shower, or when we're driving, or when we're washing dishes, or when we're sleeping, those solutions, or that scene that we never even thought of. So for example, Rita becomes a very major character in the second half. Rita was such a minor character in the first part. I never thought I'd see her again. And one day I sat down at the computer and there's a whole chapter on Rita, and it had had to be in there somewhere working its way around, or it would not have come out the morning it did. So yeah, definitely.
All right. I feel like I don't think I've ever sort of heard that idea of writing prose like that. And I really love it. I think it makes total sense. So thank you so much. Um, so at this point, I know we're drawing to a close. I just want to say, as always, it is so lovely just to hear our authors bring their books to life in their own voices. So thank you so much to Stephen, Marianna, and Sharon for your generosity with your time, your words, your thoughts, your perspectives on all of this. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today to celebrate these incredible writers. Don't forget that you can order Madame Curie's Piano Tuner, Diamond City, and But Do You Love Me with Locura from the links in the chat. I'm just dropping those in there. And please also consider checking out atmospherepress.com to browse our new and forthcoming releases, to sign up for our email newsletter where you can hear about more events like this one, and to submit a book manuscript of your own. Feel free to submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com and let us know that you attended today's event. Until then, we'll look forward to hearing from you, but that's it for today, and have a great Memorial Day weekend, everyone.
Thanks, Ayla.